After a 19-year high in the incidence of cross-border violence, shelling and ceasefire violations, guns fell silent in Jammu and Kashmir all of a sudden in the last week of February 2021. India and Pakistan agreed to cease firing along the line of control and all other sectors with effect from the midnight of 24th, 25th of February. This clearly is a very encouraging development. The Director General of Military Operations for India, Lieutenant General Paramjit Singh Sangha, and his Pakistani counterpart, Major General Noman Zakaria, in the interest of achieving mutually beneficial and sustainable peace along the borders, agreed to address each other's core issues and concerns which have propensity to disturb peace and lead to violence, read the agreement. The announcement by the two DGMOs caught many by surprise, and yet it highlights a simple fact. Countries cannot be run by grandstanding alone, and realism requires reason. The ceasefire declaration is also a consequence of the realization in New Delhi and Islamabad that they cannot afford to let violence escalate into a conflict, as events in the wake of the Pulwama attacks made evident. In my personal opinion, the 2021 ceasefire is arguably the most significant military measure by India and Pakistan in over 18 years. It also follows a period of intense hostility and violence between the two sides. 2020 alone witnessed 5,133 ceasefire violations, the highest since 2002, in which 24 security personnel and 22 civilians were killed on the Indian side. Since 2018, a total of 11,000 separate incidents of ceasefire violations have been recorded in which both military personnel and civilians have lost their lives. So how did this agreement materialize? What went on behind the scenes to achieve this? The exact sequence of events that led to the ceasefire agreement remains a matter of speculation, but some key developments in the past few weeks provide indications of a possible rapprochement and diplomatic outreach between the two sides. Earlier this month, Pakistan's Army Chief Qamar Javed Bajwa stated, quote unquote, "It is time to extend a hand of peace in all directions." It was in sharp contrast to Pakistan's earlier anti-India rhetoric. He went on to add that, quote unquote, "Pakistan and India must also resolve the long-standing issue of Jammu and Kashmir in a dignified and peaceful manner." General Bajwa's statement was followed by a decline in the recorded incidents of ceasefire violations between the two sides. Then there was the Pakistani attendance at the SARC virtual workshop on COVID-19, which was also addressed by the Indian Prime Minister, Mr. Modi. Meanwhile, Imran Khan's special aircraft was allowed access into Indian airspace during his recent visit to Sri Lanka. Remember, India decided to do so despite Pakistan's 2019 denial of airspace to Indian VVIP flights of President Kovind and Prime Minister Modi. During the February 2021 trip to Sri Lanka, Prime Minister Imran Khan stated that, quote unquote, "Our only dispute is Kashmir, and it can only be resolved through dialogue." That's if on cue here in India. Army Chief Narawane stated that with our continuous engagement with Pakistan, we will be able to prevail over them, meaning Pakistan, for border peace, as unsettled borders help no one. Remember, this was just one day before the ceasefire was announced in a Ministry of Defense press release. Media reports have suggested that months of back-channel talks led by India's National Security Advisor Ajit Doval and Pakistan's Army Chief General Bajwa led to the breakthrough. Pakistani side, however, has denied that there was a back channel. But is it possible that the ceasefire has come about without high-level contacts between the two sides? I am personally inclined to believe that there were back-channel conversations between India and Pakistan before the ceasefire announcement. And I have two reasons to think so. One, such major India-Pakistan developments do not happen out of the blue. Two, DGMO conversations are routine. They happen every Tuesday, and they will not make key announcements without political clearance. The ceasefire announcement in 2021 comes after a hiatus of 18 years. The last proper ceasefire was in November 2003. Both the 2021 and 2003 agreements are unwritten and basically a reiteration of the 1972 Simla Agreement. So before we unpack the significance of the current agreement, indulge me a little while I briefly explain the history of the India-Pakistan ceasefire agreements. Ceasefires and peace pacts between India and Pakistan have a long and complex history. India and Pakistan fought a war in Jammu and Kashmir within months of gaining independence in August 1947 as India sought to push back on the tribal invasion initially backed and eventually led by the Pakistan Army. The two sides came to a protracted stalemate. On the 31st of December 1947, a United Nations sponsored ceasefire brought hostilities to a halt in Jammu and Kashmir. In 1949, the two countries signed an agreement in Karachi, the then capital of Pakistan. Signed under the good offices of the United Nations, the Karachi Agreement created the India-Pakistan boundary in Jammu and Kashmir. It was called the Ceasefire Line or the CFL. The United Nations Military Observer Group in India and Pakistan was mandated to monitor the ceasefire line along the CFL. Cut to 1965. The India-Pakistan War of 1965 also ended in a ceasefire. Since the peace agreement in Tashkent restored the status quo ante bellum, the CFL in Jammu and Kashmir remained completely unaltered. Cut to 1971. The 1971 Bangladesh Liberation War changed all of that. Here is what happened. The December 1971 ceasefire that ended the war was enshrined into the Simla Agreement in 1972. Subsequent agreement in Suchetgarh in 1972 delineated the line of control, not the phrase, line of control, in Jammu and Kashmir that resulted from the December 1971 ceasefire. Thereby, the ceasefire line of 1949 was renamed the line of control in 1972. But let me tell you, there is more to the story. This seemingly minor change in the nomenclature was a clever move by the Indian negotiators. It made the UNMOGIP or the United Nations group presence in Kashmir irrelevant, as there was no longer a CFL or ceasefire line, but an LOC, line of control, in Jammu and Kashmir from 1972 onwards. The United Nations force mandated to ensure the ceasefire on the CFL became redundant, or at least that is what is India's reading of it. Moreover, the United Nations was not even a party to the Simla Agreement of 1972. So, the 2003 agreement between the DGSMO was a reiteration of the December 1971 war termination ceasefire. Technically, therefore, even the 2021 ceasefire is a reiteration of the 1971 ceasefire, which was written into the Simla Agreement of 1972. Both the 2003 and the 2021 ceasefires are also unwritten agreements. Keeping this history in mind, let us now unpack the 2021 agreement a little more. Current ceasefire comes after a low point in India-Pakistan relations. The Pulwama attack in 2019, in which 40 Indian security personnel were killed, worsened the already far from harmonious India-Pakistan relations. The Indian side retaliated by carrying out airstrikes on terrorist campsites in Balakot across the international border in Pakistan. The conflict escalated further when the two air forces subsequently engaged each other in February 2019. The Indian Air Force claimed that it had shot down a Pakistani F-16 aircraft, whereas the Pakistani side shot down an Indian MiG-21 Bison jet and captured its pilot. He was of course later returned to India, but the relations between India and Pakistan went on a downward spiral. Tensions shot up even further in August 2019 when India de-operationalized the provisions of Article 370 in Jammu and Kashmir. In response, Prime Minister Imran Khan decided to downgrade diplomatic ties with India. Both countries recalled their respective high commissioners. Pakistan marshaled its diplomatic wherewithal but failed to galvanize international opinion against India on the question of Kashmir. At the same time, it upped the ante along the line of control, which saw an unprecedented increase in ceasefire violations. The total numbers added up to a staggering figure of 8,612 violations in 2019 and 2020 put together. By June 2020, India had asked Pakistan to reduce its diplomatic staff strength at the Pakistani High Commission in New Delhi. Pakistan responded by asking the Indian High Commission in Islamabad to do the same. Seen against this backdrop, the 2021 announcement is a significant breakthrough after the diplomatic breakdown between India and Pakistan. It is also the first such agreement since the 2003 ceasefire agreement, which saw the tensions along the line of control decline for a few years until the terror attacks in Mumbai in 2008. The 2003 ceasefire eroded over the years as the situation in Kashmir first deteriorated throughout 2010, then improved slightly before taking a plunge once again from 2016 onwards. It is in this immediate context and in the light of the larger history of India-Pakistan relations and conflict in Jammu and Kashmir that the recent ceasefire must be understood. So what happens now? There is no doubt that the 2021 agreement is a significant breakthrough. It is also fundamentally different from the routine ceasefire assurances that the two sides made to each other till January 2021. Twice in 2018, for instance, when the ceasefire violations were on a rise, the two sides agreed to uphold the ceasefire agreement, but to no avail. The February ceasefire is significant because of its two distinct features. One, this was a joint statement by the two Directors General of Military Operations. And two, unlike the previous assurances, it mentions a specific date and time, the midnight of 24th, 25th February, at which the ceasefire goes into effect. And it has gone into effect since. Coming in the wake of over 5,000 ceasefire violations in 2020, highest in 19 years since 2002. The agreement is path-breaking from a conflict management point of view. Interestingly, the November 2003 ceasefire agreement was also announced in the wake of high levels of violence through 2002 and 2003. As I argue in my column in The Hindu this morning, the ceasefire also helps India to diffuse the concern of an ugly two-front situation. Contrary to the domestic grandstanding by political leaders, getting caught between an inimical Pakistan and an aggressive China would have neither been easy nor practical to manage. Therefore, the best way forward for New Delhi was to diffuse at least one front. The LOC was a natural candidate since it is easier to deal with the less powerful Pakistan than the more powerful China. That the current ceasefire agreement between the two DGMOs was certainly preceded by weeks, if not months, of high-level contacts through the back channel is also significant. It also started much before the recent India-China disengagement on the line of actual control. New Delhi's thinking was clear. It needs to diffuse the Pakistan front, and it may just have done that. And yet, it calls for, I would say, cautious optimism. Even though the two sides have agreed to cease fire, the Indian Army maintains that there would be no let-up in counter-terror operations. In fact, the Army says it retains the right to respond in case of an attack in future. But let us also keep in mind that a ceasefire does not observe itself. The current agreement does not have a written down set of rules and norms for effective observance of the ceasefire. This needs to change. Now that there is a jointly declared ceasefire agreement in Jammu and Kashmir, it is pertinent that the two sides finalize a set of norms and rules to enforce it. Scholarly literature from conflict zones around the world suggests that an unwritten ceasefire tends to break down easily and trigger tensions in other domains. In the days ahead then, one can expect the two countries to move towards the restoration of diplomatic ties. General Narawane's statement one day before the ceasefire, the ties between New Delhi and Islamabad are beginning to take a new shape, hints in that positive direction. India also may agree to attend the SAARC summit in Pakistan later this year. It has been pending since 2016, as you know, when India convinced other members such as Bangladesh, Afghanistan and Bhutan not to participate in the summit. If anything, Prime Minister Modi's call to SAARC countries to cooperate to deal with COVID-19 and the Pakistani attendance at the recent SAARC meetings on COVID-19 provide an indication of the things to come. Whether the February ceasefire will lead to something more than silent guns on either side of the line of control, which is in itself a great beginning, is something we don't know yet. Thank you for watching.
To receive instant updates on all videos from The Wire, click the subscribe button and hit the bell icon. Pay to support independent journalism. Click the link in the description and choose the amount you want to pay.